Well, thank you, everyone. I'm just going to introduce myself first. Jason Morrell, co-founder and chair of the Australian Cyber Network. So thank you, everyone, for attending today. Before we start, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So firstly, I'd just like to introduce some of the people behind me who will be speaking. So I'm just going to give you a bit of background on how the ACN came to be and how we ended up here today. So for a few of the people in the room, there is a knowledge of AusCyber, which was started from DISA many years ago, back in 2017, as one of the original growth centres. So most of us who are here today, or a lot of us, are actually ex-AusCyber people. So myself, I was CEO there for a while. Linda and I didn't quite cross paths, but Linda's the co-founder and CEO of the Australian Cyber Network, and Kathleen and Amelia, who also worked at AusCyber for a while, and Tom, who's behind the camera. So we've all got a lineage that sort of goes back there. And how this sort of formed was Kathleen was still at AusCyber, and I was saying when the tenure ended in June 30 this year, it'd be great to get involved and keep the work going. And Kathleen said, I've actually been speaking to Linda, and Linda would like to do the same thing. That'd be great if we could sort of continue it on. So we started the process of acquiring the assets to AusCyber, so AU Cyberscape and AU Cyber Explorer, and we'll talk about some of Andrew's background back in the lineage back there as well. And we basically said, let's do it. So it is currently not government funded. This is something that we're self-funding, but as a not-for-profit, and we're looking at charity status down the track as well. We're looking to use this vehicle now to take all the good assets that we had at AusCyber. So anything, you learn a lot of lessons through there. Linda will go through some of the numbers at the back end, but it was a very, very small, almost cottage industry when it first started back in 2017. And how the industry's grown over that time has been something to see. So we've learned a lot of lessons, what worked, what didn't work over that time. And part of what we're going to be talking about today is, the future and how we take cyber forward, from this point forward. So most of the work we've sort of done so far and we're looking to do in the future is really looking to help startup businesses to scale up. So I find I've got a background in doing startups in cyber and other areas, and the starting up part is often the easiest part. You come with an idea, you get started, and that's where you get excited. And the part where it gets less exciting is when you have to do that scale up part, and you've got to sell, and you've got to get people into your business and using your products and services. And this is often where we've seen a lot of businesses fall over and fall by the wayside. So we'd like to step in there with the experience of people who have actually done it. So one of the people and board member who can't be with us today is Mark Arena, who did Intel 471, and it's a 9-figure exit on that business there. But having people of that ilk can help people get through to the next level. People like Bud Crowd and Casey Ellis and others, and myself with the experience we've had, we'd like to try and help bring the next generation of startups through in Australia. And I'm sure, when Michelle speaks, she'll be speaking about sovereign capability. In the strategy, we talk about sovereign capability and filling that gap. And so there's ways we can support startups to actually help them get on their feet and get moving a lot quicker. So that's something we're into. And also vulnerable communities, so there's a, 98.3% of businesses in Australia are 20 people or less. So small business is the backbone of this country. And we're not doing too much to assist them, or we could do more in that part. One of the other bodies I chair is the CSCAU, and we have done something in the SMB 1001, which is a small business health check. And that's something that, as of November 1, I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning, is going to be an international standard. So already in chats with Singapore, New Zealand, and also the US in actually making that an international status for small business. So this is something where Australian know-how and knowledge can be expanded back out to the rest of the world. So these are exciting aspects that we want to look at and actually help in that sort of part as well. With the education piece, and as we've discussed before, it's getting in early, with kids. We're trying to teach people or unlearn bad habits in the workplace. So often what's happening is we're going into the workplace and saying, let's fix this problem, and teach people good habits. Really should be starting back a lot earlier. My own experience with my girls, they had phones in their hands before they could speak, and they were intuitively using the Apple iPhone and getting into probably places they probably shouldn't have. We teach them to brush their teeth. We teach them to wear seatbelts when they get in the vehicle, but we're not teaching the basics of cybersecurity. And so there's an air gap at the moment with parents not having the knowledge to be able to teach children. So there's programs we can have that we've already got existing in Australia that we can use in the schooling system to help with that as well, and we'll take part in that. With the board that I've got behind me, we've got some of the board members, Kylie Watson, Miranda Mears, and Annie Hagar as well. We're all passionate about actually giving back and helping, so this is something where I think everyone, including the team with Amelia and Kathleen, is really looking to basically give back. We've seen what works and we want to really expand upon that. With regard to careers as well, and we go back to school, we want it to be a situation where people know the basics of cyber, so when they get to a year 10 and they sit down with someone who says, what's your career going to look like? What do you want to do when you leave school? Instead of just saying accountant or lawyer, they have the opportunity of saying, what about a GRC professional like governance, risk and compliance? Your grades and your aptitudes actually look good for that job. Let's get you on a career pathway there and start to open it up there so people can see it as a career. Because, and Linda will touch on later, we're looking at the 2030 strategy, the latest numbers over 80,000 jobs short by that time frame. And so, as part of the ACN, we want to get a full data set so we can see where are those gaps. It might not be pen testing, but everyone's going, I want to be a pen tester. It could be GRC. So we need to know exactly what those numbers are so we can point people in the right direction and start to get those sorts of things done as well. Now, before I go much longer, and I haven't taken any thunder away, hopefully this is a good little leeway and a little softball, but I'll intro someone that both Linda and I met a few weeks ago in Parramatta. We had some excitement before we got in the office, didn't we, Linda? That was quite exciting. But we met Andrew, and it was great to sit down with such a personal person, first of all, but also when we spoke about Cyber, someone who'd been involved in the early days with building one of the platforms with Cyber. So it was great to have you acknowledge that, and we really connected, I think, on vulnerable communities and other pieces of work that we're really looking to do. And that's a broad range of stroke, and I'm sure Michelle will touch on getting more females in there and neurodiverse people into the industry and stuff like that. These are things that are really driving us. So I want to hand over, if I can, to Special Envoy for Cybersecurity and Digital Resilience, Dr. Andrew Charlton. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, Jason. And congratulations to you and Linda and the whole board for creating the ACN, a very important new institution in Australia's cyber landscape. I want to acknowledge Lieutenant General McGuinness and, of course, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I'm very excited to be here today at this launch for a few reasons. First of all, the obvious reason that cybersecurity, I think, is one of the biggest social and government challenges that we have. All of us are living more of our lives online, and the problem that we have is that the criminals are following us online. And so we face a huge effort for governments and citizens to make those online spaces safer. The second reason is that I really believe that, unlike many other national security challenges, this is not a challenge that government alone can deliver. We have to work in partnership with businesses and with citizens, with not-for-profits, in order to harden Australia and protect our national cyber security. And so to see a group focused on the industry, a group focused on developing our businesses, is an incredibly welcome development in the cyber landscape in Australia. And the third reason, as Jason alluded to, is that I do have a long-standing personal connection with Cyber. In fact, I think before there were any actual employees, my company, Alpha Beta, was employed by the co-chairs to develop the first sector competitiveness plan for Cyber. And then we continued to work with them as consultants over the subsequent several years, building one of the workforce platforms, doing some of the data analysis and strategy delivery. And I believed then that the mission of Cyber was incredibly important to the Australian cyber industry, and I still believe that, which is why I'm so thrilled that you are both carrying forward and building on that vision with ACN. I actually went back this morning and read some of the 2017 sector competitiveness plan that we wrote all those years ago. And we had consulted with a lot of industry participants. We had spoken to a lot of experts in the area. And that plan identifies a huge opportunity for Australia's cybersecurity industry. But it also identified some constraints. One constraint was the challenges that we had in building and commercialising Australian innovation into cyber businesses. The second challenge it identified was the difficulty that we were facing in taking the many small Australian cyber firms and scaling them into medium and large firms. And the third challenge was workforce. the inadequate pipeline of skills that we had coming through our education system. I think those challenges are not yet solved, still very big on the agenda, and that's why it's, I think, very important that ACN is focusing on those and other challenges, taking the work of AustCyber and growing it, focusing on advocacy, on capability, and on education. You know, for me, I also feel that this work is important not just to build the Australian cyber industry, but it's important for the entire Australian economy. And I believe that because that same business, that Alphabeta business that worked with AustCyber was itself the subject of a cyber attack. I remember the day, we were quite a young business at the time. I poured my heart and soul into this business, built it up from me and one other person in my attic. We just reached a sort of a level of maturity where the business was growing. We had good customers. We had what we felt was the beginnings of stability and the big lift that is starting a business in Australia. And then one morning I realised that we'd been the subject of a cyber attack and we had lost an enormous amount of money. I remember the sinking feeling in my heart as I had to then think about how would we try and recover that money. We were talking to the banks, talking to some cyber experts. How were we going to meet payroll that month? How were we going to keep the doors of the business open through that challenge? And our business eventually recovered through that, but after a big financial loss and a big loss of time and energy. But the biggest thing that I think we lost in that was confidence. We became quite fearful of engaging in the digital world. And I think for all the money that my business lost and thousands of other Australian businesses lose in cyber attacks and the time that's wasted, that is a big cost that a strong and effective cyber industry can help minimise. But the bigger cost to Australia is that digital chill, that sense of fear that many Australians have and many Australian businesses have, that online spaces aren't safe, that they shouldn't venture too far into them. They should be fearful of that click, fearful of that phone call that they don't recognise. And that digital chill probably isn't measured in the millions. It might not even be measured in the single-digit billions. This is a constraint on Australia's productivity, on the growth of our small, medium and big businesses, and ultimately our advancement into the future digital economy. So for me, the mission of ACN is incredibly important, not just for Australia's cyber industry, but for the entire Australian economy. I'm thrilled that you are picking up the mantle of AustCyber and taking it forward in this new form, and I look forward very much to working with you to build a strong Australian cybersecurity industry. Thanks.
Yeah, that reminds me of how I sort of got into cyber in the first place too. So I was in a previous business. We had a domain name and hosting business, and one of our clients actually got hacked, or they had 3 of their clients hacked. It was from an email man-in-the-middle attack, and they lost $782,000 of clients' money. And it was a small Gold Coast law firm, only 10 people, and they were out of business within, sort of 6 months after that. So this is the thing, we do hear about the big attacks, but often with a small business, it only takes one attack like that, and it can have a knock-on effect across 3 property settlements not happening, the loss of money and everything like that as well. So the next person I'd like to introduce is our podcast star, Lieutenant General Michelle McGuinness. Now, we met, Tom and I and Michelle back in RSA this year, and it was funny because it was 2018 was the first mission I went on, and it was with AustCyber back in 2018, and it was great to see. I think Tom and I sort of reflected on seeing the room and how big it was and how much growth we'd had in the industry over that time, and the maturity of some of the businesses now. That I remember like Attack Forge, when we first went there, and Bugcrowd were there, and these other businesses when John and I first went and did CyberAware, and to see everyone sort of come through, I'd like to see more of that. So, it was great to meet you then, and I'd like to introduce Michelle to say a few words, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to add my congratulations to the team, to the board, for stepping forward. It's fantastic. The government has set an incredibly key vision for us to achieve, which is to be a cyber secure nation by 2030. It's an imperative and it's a whole of nation endeavour. So my position was set up as a coordinator to ensure that we do coordinate across our cybersecurity policy. that we coordinate across our response and across our response preparedness and capabilities. But I don't do that alone, and Dr. Charlton has alluded to the lift that it requires from all of us. As a result, we're forging a brand new, genuine public-private partnership across the economy to drive this, and entities such as this are critical to driving that public-private partnership. So it's exciting to have more players driving and helping us with that. It is a whole-of-nation endeavour. It absolutely requires all of us to uplift from every student, every citizen, every small business, every big industry, every part of government. It's absolutely critical that we rise our, elevate our security posture, our cyber strength. The other important issue is really about our sovereign capability. It's critical that we strengthen our sovereign capability. When we have sovereign capability, we actually reduce our vulnerability to insecure supply chains, to unverifiable supply chains. This is absolutely critical as we work with trusted partners and Australians to build our capabilities, and that extends to our workforce. We must have that pathway that you spoke about, that school leavers, career changers can easily see themselves in the field, can identify a pathway to get there, can know what they want to be and how they've got to be one, and then be interchangeable across industry, working for government, working for the private sector, working for academia, wherever it is. There's a huge amount of work to be done in a really short time across this space, and I'm super excited to be part of it and partnering with you and with your background and with the passion that you bring to this. And at each time I've interacted with these members, and I've met most of these members in different roles, you've demonstrated your commitment and passion. So I'm super excited, and congratulations again.
Yeah, that's excellent, and this is why we drive it. And I think anyone who works in cyber, you do it because you care. You know, most people that I come across in the industry are doing this because they really want to help, you know, and protect people. And you know, we sometimes have to take probably a few steps back. So, as Michelle just touched on there, you know, we've spoken about the Act Now, Stay Secure, you know, campaign, which is an excellent step forward. You know, we've always spoken about the slip, slop, slap of cyber, right? You know, we need campaigns which are going to cut through and actually get out of the cyber bubble and actually start to talk to the people in the community. You know, and I sort of like, and I said to Andrew, and he can borrow this one, I didn't trademark or copyright it, but, you know, the passwords are like the seatbelts in a car, you know, the multi-factor authentication is the airbags, and then we look at getting your car serviced as updates when available, you know. And if we can sort of start to see this come through in the community where people can say, I can attach what that means to something that I do in my everyday life, I think we'll start to be on the path forward, because we sometimes make it still too technical, you know, when we're talking to the general populace, and we just need to get past that and actually start to make it more accessible. So, but more importantly, I'm going to introduce Linda Kavanagh, who, you know, is a similar soul to mine, you know, is actually looking to help the community and give back as much as we can. You know, it's been great. Everything's just happened perfectly since we met. It's when you know you're on a good mission. All the people we have on our board, the people we have working for us and working around us. I've never had a business that's actually just flowed this easily, you know. So, and then a big part is to Linda. So I'll get Linda to wrap up, and then we'll just open up for any sort of questions after that point. So, Linda.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I know, big day for us. Thank you, first of all, to Special Envoy Charlton and to Lieutenant General McGuinness for coming and supporting us with this launch. Part of the reason of why we have actually established Australian Cyber Network is to be able to work hand in hand with government, to be able to help them with the challenges when it comes to cybersecurity and our national interests, but also to help them with the action items with the National Cybersecurity Strategy for 2030. 2030 is not that far away, 7 years away. When AusCyber was started, it was 7 years ago. And Dr. Charlton, as you'll probably know, we had an ecosystem of a handful of cybersecurity companies, of sovereign companies. And we had approximately about 11,000 workforce in cybersecurity. And where we're sitting at now for 2023, that's increased to over 125,000. And it's projected to increase to well over 210,000 come 2030. Our companies have grown from a handful to 315 at the moment, and we're anticipating to have approximately 500 companies by the time we hit 2030. Our gross domestic product, the gross value added to the economy by the cybersecurity industry is sitting at about $3.9 billion, and it's been projected to hit $5.2 billion in 2030. So how do we help government be able to move the needle to ensure that we meet and if not surpass some of these gaps that we have and these challenges that we have. And that's why the Australian Cyber Network is here. We have a mission, very simple, of advocacy, capability, and education. And Dr. Charlton actually spoke about the advocacy part and the education part, where talked about building that bridge with industry and academia, with government. Government cannot do this alone, and they need the advice from a broader section of the community, not those with just vested interests in the development of cybersecurity capability, but actually from industry. And the Australian Cyber Network will actually provide that independent, unbiased voice that can be provided to governments so that they are well informed when it comes to making policy, changing legislation, but also in the delivery of their action items for the cybersecurity strategy as well. Under capability, Lieutenant General McGuinness spoke about sovereign capability and our national interests, and that is something that both Jason and I are very passionate about. The national interest, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, is ever enduring. We need to ensure that we can rely on our technology, not necessarily international technology, and to be able to ensure the safety of our supply chains and our businesses as well. As it was mentioned before, small business is the backbone of our economy, but a small business doesn't have a team of ICT specialists or a cybersecurity company, nor do they have a $100,000 budget to be able to deliver the security and the capability that they need. And this is where ACN will be able to help not just the capability of our industry to grow our technology, but to also help the capability of small businesses and not-for-profits as well, be able to uplift their cybersecurity, whether it's, mum and dad takeaway shop on the corner, or whether it's an accountant's or a law firm that are employing 20, 30, 40 people. We're able to support that uplift, and what we really need to be doing is supporting our technology here. We have absolutely fabulous, top-notch global researchers, innovators and entrepreneurs here. We need to retain them here. We need to make sure that we support them and that we're investing in their capability, which is being utilised by our cybersecurity companies. And the last part of our mission is education. Yes, we have projected a workforce gap of about 85,000, but we don't know what that 85,000 is actually made of. And part of me actually thinks that, I think that's probably a little bit under as to where it actually needs to be. And it's not necessarily a gap in positions, but it's predominantly to do with skills. We need to work with industry, we need to work with academia, we need to work with government to try and look at the professionalisation of the cybersecurity industry. This is not something that is going to happen overnight, but we need to ensure that what is supporting our economy, what is supporting our large organisations, and what is supporting our small businesses, that right educational career pathway is there for them. So that someone who puts their hand up and says, I want to be part of cybersecurity, they understand what area they may have an aptitude in, but what area it is actually that interests them. And that is supporting that next generation of cybersecurity professionals, but also potentially entrepreneurs as well. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So, any questions for anyone here?
I've got questions for you. I'm sure there are one, Stefan. So you recently said that cybercrime is the most significant shift in criminal activity since the handgun. Can you tell me a little bit more about the idea you were trying to get through there?
Yeah, I think this is a huge change in the way that criminal activity has evolved. The cost of cybercrime around the world is now measured in the trillions of dollars. In Australia, there is a cybercrime reported every 6 minutes and millions more that go unreported. And the total profit of all cyber gangs around the world practicing ransoms and extortions is bigger than the profit of all trade and trafficking in illicit drugs combined. This is a massive growing global problem, and we need to change our social government, citizen architecture to make sure that we are safe. I think we take a lot of the things for granted in the physical world that we live with every day. Jason mentioned this point. We've built a physical world that is safe for us. I think about my daughter walking down the street. She knows to walk on the footpath. She knows when she wants to cross the road. She has to look for a crossing. Someone's helpfully painted some white lines on the road. The driver that's approaching knows to slow down. She knows to look left and right and left again. This is the culture of safety, the infrastructure of safety that we've built in the physical world, and we need to do the same in the digital world. And you've seen the government have a huge agenda right across many different portfolios. Just in the last couple of months, we've had privacy legislation from Mark Dreyfus. We've had social media reforms being introduced by Minister Rowland. Minister Rowland's been working on misinformation and disinformation. We've got Stephen Jones working on the anti-scam centre. A couple of hours ago, the cybersecurity legislation was introduced into the House of Representatives. The government has a big cross-government agenda to make Australians feel as safe online as they do in the physical world.
One of the challenges that we've heard today is reporting numbers and actually being aware of it. There was a story recently at the AFR summit where ASD said I think they made around 650 calls of people that they believed they could see being breached, and 230 calls were just never picked up or answered. So the legislation that's gone in today is a lot about people having to notify if they are involved in ransomware. Could you tell me a little bit more about that and how that helps to kind of tie up this industry and government into moving us towards a cyber-secure solution?
Well, you're right. We still have a massive number of cybersecurity incidents that are unreported, and an even larger number of cybersecurity incidents that go uninvestigated. I remember the cyber attack on my own business. I called the police. I never got any follow-up. I called the bank. They weren't able to help with the bulk of the money that had been stolen from us. So we have the institutions of crime and justice in Australia that need to catch up with the way that crime has moved online. That's a big job. The legislation that's been introduced today does some of that. It increases some of the reporting requirements for businesses that are the subject of ransomware attacks. And it makes it easier for other businesses to report and engage and share information with government when they are the subject of attacks. So it's another step in building that partnership between the private sector and the government and building trust when we're working together on cybersecurity matters.
Yep, cool. This one's, I think, largely for Andrew and Michelle. You said earlier, Andrew, that government can't do everything on this, and we've got a couple of different iterations of that. But there's another way of saying that, which is that government can do something. And I think, just looking around, I think there's quite a few people here who've been, who've worked up against the sort of government tech space for some time. And there is this real culture, I think, in a lot of public service that tech is just not something that government does. There are historical reasons for that, as I'm sure you're aware. So I guess my question is really around what do you perceive, or both of you perceive, as the relative roles of the government, non-government, and private sectors in this space?
Oh, sure. Look, I think we all have unique strengths, and it'd be crazy not to leverage them. There are things that we're really good at in government and things that industry are really good at. I think their speed of adoption, I think their innovation, I think people do that for a living. In government, we seek to support, provide policy, drive strategy, have a vision. Of course, there are some world-class technical experts in government. I'm looking at some of them in the room here that run amazing capabilities, including in this space. But industry brings so much and brings a unique perspective. So diversity and bringing all perspective to the table is critical. And in my short time, 8 or 9 months in the job, the value that industry have brought that fill the pieces that rapidly allow us to move forward and harden as a nation and build our resilience have been incredible, have been absolutely valuable. Those partnerships, that trust. This is not an area for competition. this is an area for collaboration because it really is about national security, national prosperity and stability.
Yeah, look, I think government has a really important role here. I think about myself as a business owner. I wanted one question answered, which is, what do I need to do? What are the requirements on me? And frankly, I think government has a long way to go to clarify that question for businesses. I think it's a hard question. Government is really good at telling people what they can't do. They're really good at telling people what they have to do. But neither of those tools, I think, are the optimal tool in the cybersecurity space. If we just tell people what they have to do and put in minimum standards, we have a massively heterogeneous range of industry participants and businesses, and we will ultimately get something which is either a minimum standard that everyone can meet but is insufficient for many of those businesses, or something which is too high and unable to be achieved by many businesses. So the kind of cap and collar approach here, I think, isn't going to work to get the best cybersecurity outcome for Australian businesses. So government needs to flip and do what government is less used to doing, which is create the incentives for every organisation, not to meet a minimum standard or a maximum standard, but to do the best that they can based on their data, risk profile, capability, etc. And that means creating incentives within the private sector to deliver the best cybersecurity outcome that any business can deliver for its own circumstances. That's a harder tool for government to use, but I think it's the tool that's needed in this space.
So in terms of a business framework, we're not talking about something like GDPR, say, but talking about like full disclosure of how personal data is being used. Is that right?
Well, at the moment, if I go back to that fundamental question, I like to put myself back in the shoes of being a business owner. Like, what do I need to do? And at the moment, if you look at one of the pieces of the regulatory architecture that governs that question, the privacy legislation, it says you need to take reasonable steps. Well, what are reasonable steps? And if we don't help businesses to articulate that and give them the tools, support and incentives, then we're not really providing a clear pathway for them. And for small businesses in particular, which is the bulk of the Australian economy, if we don't make it really simple and really clear, we just won't get the engagement that we need. And that for me, I think that is a really important step for the government to take, to really put ourselves into the shoes of business owners, think about how we make it simple, clear, and tailored to the specific circumstances of a very heterogeneous group of businesses in Australia.
I think Dr. Charlton's example is fantastic, and it's driving a little bit of a culture change, and it is difficult and it's uncharacteristic of us, but certainly in our management of incidents, we are now at a place where we're collaborating across sectors and across industry. So when someone has an incident, we're able to bring together others that have a similar experience, and industry supporting industry, and bringing that together. This is where we talk about, this is about collaboration, not about competition. But those non-threatening forums where we can bring the powers to convene, and it is uncharacteristic, and it's a cultural change in the way that we support industry. But we're pushing those boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I think it's we were sort of discussing earlier that a system, and whether you're talking about a company, a government, a country, can only really be as strong as its weakest links are from a cybersecurity perspective. So I think that's fantastic, and I think. One of the other things that sort of came up in that was this discussion about sovereign capability. I think there's probably a general feeling in a lot of the tech community that we're behind where we'd like to be in that respect. And again, there are historical reasons for that have very little to do with what's going on at the moment. But how do we balance sort of lifting our sovereign capability, but sort of getting a sort of safer system as quickly as possible?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a big challenge. I think there are many businesses out there, many boards at the moment who are very seized with the challenge of cybersecurity, aware that it is a big operational risk, a big reputational risk to them, and they're thinking, how do I mitigate that risk as conservatively as possible? And that often involves, going to a big international player to get the advice. The old saying, you never get fired for hiring McKinsey. And I think there's an equivalent in the cybersecurity world. So that is a KPMG though. You do get hired for... No, I won't say that. And I think there is an analogy there in the cybersecurity world, and that's why I think ACN's work is so important. It's to raise the profile, to provide capability, to provide the workforce, so that we lift the profile of Australian businesses, put them on the radar of many of the customers that we have in Australia, give them the confidence to procure from those Australian businesses. And ultimately, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more work they get, the stronger their capabilities are, and the more work they can provide to others. So I think we're at that level where the maturity of the industry is growing, the maturity of the customer base is growing, and the best thing we can do to accelerate that is the types of initiatives that ACN is working on today.
We have some initiatives that I know ACN are going to be absolutely critical to supporting, which is communicating across industry, big industry, what are the capability gaps you have, so that we can join the innovators and the small businesses and those startups with what it is needed. So that's one part of the puzzle, and ACN will play a role in helping connect that. The other thing that we're doing is, at every opportunity, we need to showcase what we do have sovereign. I've been incredibly surprised at the depth and breadth of our sovereign capabilities, and I think, as Dr. Charlton alluded to, often they have to move offshore to get the bulk of the mass to support their startup. We need to be able to showcase that across Australia, so that those businesses looking to shore up their supply chains, ensure they have redundancy and all those things we look for in a sovereign capability, as well as lifting the nation, are really important. So there's a really important role there for closing those gaps between what's needed and what we can actually develop.
Did anyone from ACN want to jump in on that one as well?
Yeah, well, I think from having a startup in Australia before, and this is going back a fair bit now, we first started our first one back in 2017. And with the group that we went through with, it did require international. It was hard to get procurement, especially for a government and larger industry here. When you look at other parts of the world, they are a bit more open to purchasing from sovereign capability. But in the infancy, I think we were also creating businesses that probably weren't filling gaps that were required. So I think it's both sides of the coin, right? So you need to speak to government, and you need to speak to the industry CISOs and say, what is it you actually need filled? There's no use running out and doing a cyber startup company that is not even in the top 10 list of worries or concerns for the government or for CISOs. So what we'll do is put groups together that say, here are the top 3 things that the CISOs in Australia and others are actually saying they need. Build that. So put that out to market. Do it, reverse it around and say, this is what's actually required. So who's got the capability out there, and build that team. So a lot of the stuff we're doing as collaboration is, if there is a grant or is there something that needs to be filled in the community, don't just give it to one company who might have people who can do it. Form a group of the best people, the A team, to go and then solve for that problem, whether that be with a startup, and bring people together. So as a startup, you can go out as a solo person. You need other people. You can be really good at coding and building the tech. If you don't do sales, you don't do marketing, you're not good with numbers. We'll help with that, right? So we'll help form groups that are actually the best teams to do all those pieces of work. So we don't have fear or favour. We're not in it to benefit and gain. It's a not-for-profit. We're trying to put money back in and bring the right people together. So it's actually, I think you need to look for the best people and build that team to build the product. And then that's going to have application offshore as well. But we need to keep ourselves here, right? Because often what happens is we're not getting purchased here, so they say, we're going to the US, we're going to the UK. They build teams over there, they become a $1 billion company like Bugcrowd, and most of the people they employ are offshore, right? So we just need to make it so it's more capable and that we can be more comfortable being here. And I think we need to do some incentives, and that's something we'll work with government to talk about how can we incentivise. And that doesn't have to be from a grant to the company, that can just be from purchasing. So it's a win-win on that basis, I think, when we're talking startups.
Fantastic. One more very quick one from Michelle.
Yes. Is it about Cybersecurity Awareness Month? Because that is this month, and it's so important. I'd love to congratulate you for choosing your timing to actually double down on the national message on everyone should uplift their cybersecurity. Sorry. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask, how's the new year?
Yeah.
You can weave some cybersecurity month.
Look, it's a great privilege. It's complex. We're a really small team trying to get after a really great and large and complex deliverable for the nation under the strategy that the government has set that vision. And back to my earlier points, none of us can do it alone. We can't compete. We must collaborate. We must bring the best that we each have. We're still building as an organisation. At the same time, we're responding to incidents across the economy with close collaboration with our technical experts who are doing fantastic work, and also the AFP. So yeah, we're progressing. Today's an exciting day with the legislation. It is October Cyber Security Awareness Month. We have worked across government, across states and territories, across academia, across industry, across small businesses to deliver 4 key messages, with the hope that at some day, one day during October, a student, a parent, a stay-at-home grandparent and a worker comes home and they all resonate with the messages. And if I can just give you the 4 messages, one is apply MFA, update your passphrases, unique and complex passphrases, update your software and be aware of phishing. So it's been a massive moment. There's a lot going on in the world today. There's a lot going on in the world this month. But there's plenty of people out there pushing these messages on social media. You'll see it on my handle, really focusing, because our aim is to prevent further victims. Our aim is to strengthen everyone and to take away that intimidatory approach. We shouldn't be intimidated. This is not a deeply technical topic. Of course, we need our deep technical experts, but there are things that all of us can do. And, you know, I'm really careful that it's not, there are so many victims and it's not their fault, because there are criminals out there pursuing us, but there are things that we can do. We've talked about click-clack. We've talked about lock the front door, the way we teach our children. There is that convergence of bringing that culture of physical security into our digital identity and into our digital profiles, and just being aware. The job's a great honour. I feel incredibly privileged to serve the nation in this way. Have a great team, and it's busy and it's fantastic. But thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Congratulations.
Hello.